And good evening. I'm Jonathan Higgins.
I'm Rich Carlson.
And I'm Dale Osborne.
And we are the Scanner Guys tonight. Welcome to the show. We've got a great show. We're talking about P25 trunking. Dale is our trunking expert, so he's going to be helping us with the presentation this evening. In case you're just joining us for the first time, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Make sure you do that right now. And definitely follow all the videos on the channel. And if you wonder where we are all the time,
I had to do that too, just here before we went on the air and turned all mine down.
I get too many radios to turn down in there. I got to figure out which one's talking.
All right, let's.
All right, so we're working on some audio issues, so please be patient. How are we doing there? Well, in the meanwhile, we're going to be talking about trunking with Dale Osborne.
P25 trunking.
Yeah.
And hopefully we get a bunch of comments, and I know that Jonathan has a good slideshow for us here.
Absolutely.
All right, so I'm being told that my audio is not distorted on this end, so we're going to continue on.
Cool.
All right, so let's get to the slideshow presentation right now. So tonight's show, we're talking about P25 trunking with Dale Osborne. You're joining us for the last show of February, and then we'll be back in March on the 2nd and 4th Wednesday of the month. So I will remind you that throughout the broadcast. All right, so the Scanner Guys are brought to you by viewers like you. Definitely shopping our merch store is certainly helping us out to keep these broadcasts going. And as always, using that affiliate link down below in each and every one of the broadcasts can be very helpful. Special thanks to Scanner Master for sponsoring tonight's show. If you got questions, give them a call at 1-800-722-6637. Shop them online at scannermaster.com. Definitely use the affiliate link down below. And as I mentioned during the earlier slide, visit our website for our newsletter and to shop our store. We've got all types of merch on our website, so definitely check that out. We've got t-shirts, coffee mug, even face mask, a tote, stickers, hoodies, you name it. So we got all types of cool stuff there, so definitely check it out. And make sure you check out the Train Aficionado store as well. We're launching that show this year. It's going to be 2 times a month, the 1st and 3rd Wednesdays of every month. That's Train Aficionado Live right here on our YouTube partner, but it'll be on the Train Aficionado YouTube channel. Make sure you follow, like, and subscribe to our social media as well, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram at The Scanner Guys. And check out the website, thescannerguyshow.com is the official website. All right, so this evening we're talking about trunking, and a lot of people are dealing with trunking all the time, such as, myself. I mean, there's P25 trunking here. Rich, you're dealing with it, and of course, Dale, you've got it there. So
what the audience doesn't know is that just before we went on the air, I actually had a phone call from one of the radio techs here. I live in Montana, and we're spinning up another site in the northeast corner of the state, or for demos. And they called about me going tomorrow and plugging in some cables at a zone controller, the Zone 2 controller, which is here in Billings where I live.
Yeah. Keep you busy.
Yeah, it certainly does. It's a statewide system. So this is an interesting slide. We've showed it, a couple weeks ago. And the basics of a trunking system. Why a trunking system? As you can see here, we put down a conventional channel plan for Mayberry. The police has their own repeater. The fire has their own repeater. The highway department's got their own repeater. The school buses have their own repeater. The electric company's got its own repeater. So everybody's got their own thing. So it's very costly. The other thing too, if you look at our meters there, you see radio traffic is pretty heavy for the police department, pretty heavy for the fire department, not so much for the highway department, not so much for the schools department, and not so much for the electric company. So they're not getting the potential of using these channels accordingly.
With what we got going on in down here in Montana right now, the highway department one would be up in the yellow, amber, or red, because we had a pretty good storm here. We got dumped on, so it's the highway departments around here have been pretty busy the last couple of days plowing snow.
And that's pretty common for a lot of areas with conventional systems. Sometimes they're really busy, sometimes they're really slow. And when you're limited to one channel, if that channel is busy, you got nothing to fall back on.
Right. Yeah, I mean, think of, with trunking, we're going to take a look at the next slide. What is trunking? Well, it's not a Motorola term. It's not even a radio communication term. It's a telephoning term, with large numbers of users sharing a small number of resources. I mean, that's basically, what trunking is. I mean, you look at the earlier slide. Each agency has its own channel, and we look at the next slide. I mean, take a look at this, Dale. This was an example that you sent from your slideshow presentation. So tell me what this is all about.
So it's the bank teller setup that when you go to the bank, you run through some lines to get up there. But when banks were open and you could get in them, they would have, depending on the size of the bank, they would have 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 tellers open, and you would get in line and go to the next open teller. And if there were other open tellers, you could go to that, change line and go to that teller to get your banking done. So you weren't always standing in line like it shows there, 2 people on 1, 2 people on 3, 2, and so that other person is waiting to either make their call or do their banking stuff. Where you had 2 channels that were open, that you could, in a trunk system, you could go to those other 2 channels.
So this is another slide. So it shows now, this is an example of your bank teller trunked. So we see that there we have a line of people, and then we have a director kind of leading you to a particular window.
It's like the little person at Walmart at Christmas time that walks around and tells you which of the 4 checkers is open.
Yeah, so this is kind of like the example of the control channel, what the control channel essentially does. I mean,
right.
For a P25 system, it has a control channel, which kind of plays, we've used this term before, as a traffic cop. How do you describe it, Dale, when you're trying to explain what that control channel does to a user?
So what the control channel is doing is the next person, the person that's standing there all by themselves waiting to go to a channel, their radio is talking to the directors, talking to them back and forth, and then the director will say, okay, I want you to go to channel 3. I'm going to set up your call at the site you're affiliated to on channel 3. I'm going to set up all the background stuff on the other sites around the white area and make sure that all the other radios that are affiliated to the system that want to talk to you or that you want to talk to, I'm going to set up that call, that IP call between all the sites, and light up a repeater site at the various sites. So the director's doing all of that and then directing you to that third person. And then the next 2 people in queue, because once that person goes to channel, or the third teller there, I want to call it a channel, once they go to that, then the system is busy. The other 2 that are in queue will wait. They'll get it busy when they key up their mic until one of those 4 channels open up. So if it's a more busy system, you would add a 5th, the 6th, the 7th, 8th channel.
Yep.
So here's another example of what we have here of, 2 different departments. So Mayberry, our Mayberry basically moved to a trunk system here. So rather than them having the 6 channels that they have, now they have 6 channels, and it's a trunk system. So Mayberry Police and Mayberry Fire both keying up the mics at the same time. It goes to that control channel, and then it basically plays traffic cop, deciding which channel essentially go to. And this, with the Mayberry scenario, it's probably going to be better for that town, because it's not going to, like that when the highway department and the buses and the electric company are not busy, those channels are quiet. So this allows, maybe the police department and the fire department have some additional talk groups.
Right.
Yeah. And then that's the nice thing about trunking system is you can have many virtual channels called talk groups, and just add those to the programming. So as long as you are within your capacity of your system, you can have multiple channels, even if they're not used very often.
Right. And in the programming too, if you have multiple sites in the programming, you can program in not only the talk groups, but you can also tell the radios that certain sites are not available by talk group or by radio. If you don't want certain radios to go on to, the big thing that everybody uses on that is the bus systems. Buses are just eat up channels like nothing you've ever seen. And yeah. And normally what they'll do is if you've got a big municipal system that has some sites out on the outer edges that are 4 or 5 or 6 channels, in town you have like 7 or like 10 channels. They're usually going like that. They'll assign those buses so that they'll stay on those more higher channeled sites so that they're not busying out the site.
Yeah. And you can also do a geographical thing, like a bus from Billings may not be able to access the system from Helena.
Right.
So let's say this Mayberry system, Dale, you were building this Mayberry system for the town. How, is there some sort of formula that you follow for the amount of talk groups that can be maintained on a 6-channel system like this?
Yeah, there's some numbers that you're supposed to go through, depending on whether you're in the state has a statewide plan through the regional planning committee for the state. You'll have some math that you have. I was told there'd be no math, but there really is.
Always math.
You'll have some numbering as to how many units you have, how many talk groups, how busy the system is going to be as to how many channels you can get. Most systems will start out with 4 or 5 channels, and then from there, if you want more channels added to it, then you do the math and figure out we've got this much loading, we need to add another channel, or we need to add another 2 channels.
So basically, when a system like this is built out, it's kind of like, okay, so we're going to have a base plan for this one. It looks like it's 6 channels, including that control channel. So, like eventually, once it keeps hitting capacity, and I'm sure you get some sort of report of how much load that the system gets, then it's time to decide, do we add 1 or 2 additional channels? On the trunking side of things, is there a way to be able to see reporting of how much load that a system gets?
Yeah, you can pull up reports and look at individual talk groups, individual radios, individual sites, as to what site's busy. If you have a whole bunch of sites in that one or a group of radios that can reach in a certain geographical area, one site. I'm going to use Helena, Montana as an example. There's a site there called Hogback Mountain because it sees the whole valley. We call it a super site, and the buses would go on it and load it up, and they don't need to go on that site. There's other sites they can use that have more channels on them. So they were bumped off that site so that they wouldn't use that affiliate to that site at all. So by programming, you could do that.
There's a question there. How do you add another channel? Is it just programming, a new antenna, new radios, or what?
So in a subscriber unit, the mobile and portable, you just have to go in and program it. In a site, depending on the manufacturer, you would add another radio. If it was a Motorola, their current thing is called an ESS rack, expandable subsystem. It's called a 6-pack. You can do 6 channels in one box. If you're going to add more than 6 channels, you add another rack or a box, and then you just add it. But you have to go through a licensing protocol to get the frequency pair. Then you would have to look at your combiner system, whether your combiner system for however many channels can be added into 1 and 2 antennas, a master transmit, a master receive. So there's a little bit of hardware addition and then programming addition. You have to program at the master site for that zone, and all of that stuff has to be updated to add that new channel to it.
Wow. Cool. I mean, it is so interesting, to be able to hear what's entailed on the other end. So when a system is busy like this, and you've got two departments trying to communicate at the same time. How does this all work?
It goes by priorities. You have like 0 to 10 or 0 to 9 priorities. 0 is always emergency. That's the highest priority. So if somebody declares an emergency, pushes their little orange button on the
Yeah.
top of their radio, you're declaring an emergency, and that gets the highest priority. Then usually the next highest priority is public safety, ambulance, fire, law enforcement, and then from there it goes down to the lowest priority to whoever the garbage department, sometimes the road department or city streets, stuff like that gets the lower priority. Administrative stuff gets real super low priority over everything. So when you're busied up like this shows on the slide, then it comes to the queue. The other radios that are lining up to use the system, depending on their priority level, if you're a priority 1 and somebody else is a priority 9, you're going to get bumped up in front of them. So you would be, even though that you requested yours behind them, you would get bumped up in front of them.
Wow. I mean, that's pretty interesting. So, literally, I mean, literally, and that's done through basically the site and, the computer, the brain of
Right,
the
right. Through
system.
the master
Yeah.
site. Everything goes through the master site. If you have multiple zones, I know there's a huge Department of Defense system, P25 trunking system, that zones are different Air Force bases around the country, including there's one here in Montana. That's one of them. All of that traffic goes through that zone controller to the master site and back, or to other zones. If they're talking to that's intra zone, if you're talking to a talk group that's in multiple zones, if different zones, when it sets up that call, the IP routing of all that call through routers and switches and all of that stuff, that's all done by the master site, and then it keeps track of all of that.
And then how are all these things connected to each other?
So at a site, at an RF site, all of those radios would be connected. If it was a Quantar base, they'd all have a Cat 5, Cat 6 cable, or an RJ45 Cat 5 cable that goes to a switch, a site switch, and then that site switch would be connected to a site controller, and then the switch would also be connected to a site router. So everything would talk to the site controller, that's the local. So if you lose connectivity with the master site, you go into what's called site trunking, and from there it goes to the master site.
And do they use microwave or the internet, or how do they connect the remote?
It could go either way. You could do oh, there's a dog here. This is Amisha. She's a standard poodle, and her buddy, the cat, is following in behind her. You could use microwave for your backhaul. You could use a T1 from a phone company. You could use fiber. Some of the new stuff is going to Ethernet based, so it could, anything that's Ethernet based. One of the big things you got to worry about is latency. That's the big thing, is the latency on stuff for calls and stuff, and that's one of the things that the manufacturer, whether it's Motorola or Harris or anybody that's doing a P25 system, is going to be looking at for your backhaul.
And that's why a lot of these sites will have GPS receivers on them, not because they don't know where they are, just so they can get that exact time.
Right.
Base.
And when it comes to simulcast, when you start doing simulcast, that's where the GPS timing becomes even more critical, because everything has to be perfectly timed. So he's just going to make himself home on that chair behind me.
So
that's for everybody that's watching. That cat's name is Loki, and that should clue you in as to how his attitude is. That's his favorite chair to claw on. So sorry, squirrel.
So we used this slide about a couple of weeks ago to just kind of describe phase 1 versus phase 2 digital trunking, where a voice channel essentially for phase 1 has got one voice path, where phase 2 has got two voice paths. Now, from manufacturers, is this their, for a system that's phase 1, is this their biggest push to get get trunking systems to basically switch to this? And is this involving, I'm sure the Motorola and such make money off of, being able to get you to go do this.
Right. Yeah, and it's another jump in the system. You started out with phase 1, which is a 12.5 kilohertz wide channel, and if you go to phase 2, it's a 6.25 kilohertz channel. So in the space of one voice channel, you get two voice channels. So in some areas of the country here, up here, there's not a lot of traffic yet in most of it. Although we have here in Billings, they're looking at doing an upgrade of the simulcast system here for the city. If they upgrade and morph into the state system, they'll probably go phase 2 with the 3 simulcast sites. There's a couple other sites in the state that are going to go phase 2, just because of the fact that if you live in the eastern part of the country, anybody that's ever been involved in licensing, getting a VHF license channel, an 800 meg channel in the greater New York area, they'll fight over a single frequency pair with lawyers, and it gets pretty ugly. It's almost the New Jersey thing. The guy comes and says, "I want it." But
Chicago, it's the same way. It used
yeah,
to be
yeah. So the phase 2 gives you in a 5, or like you've got there, you've got a control channel and 5 voice channels. That would give you 10 channels with phase 2.
Yeah, it doubles your capacity of the system,
right?
Basically.
And as far as I know, I don't know. I should ask. I've got some Motorola guys hanging around us right now because of this demo we're doing, but I should ask him. And one of them's an engineer, if he's aware of anybody doing phase 2 control channel. I'm not aware of it. I know they're capable of it, but I haven't heard of anybody doing it yet.
There's from what I've read, there's a system down in Texas, a utility system. I think it's made by Harris. I don't think any of the Motorola systems are doing that right now, but I think some of the Harris systems are.
Right.
Question, I'm not too sure. And we've been asked this. I mean, with it being split into 2 voice paths, is it possible to split this even more into 3 voice paths? I mean, some people have asked about, is there going to be a phase 3?
I haven't heard of anything for phase 3. You're really pushing down. It's obviously digital. If you're doing everything, I haven't heard of anything doing phase 3 yet. Phase 2 is as far as I've heard, and that's that falls within the FCC's original plan for narrowbanding, because the narrowbanding plan originally went from a 25 kilohertz channel to a 12.5, and then they were talking about a 6.25. So it falls within that narrowbanding thing.
Yeah. So the next phase of narrowbanding.
Yeah, it could be crazy. I mean, I know with anybody that has HD radio in their vehicle and there's, stations in the market, I know they've been able to split. I've seen that signal split, 2, 3, 4, 4 stations I've seen in some markets. But, of course, your primary station has got, pretty good bandwidth. And I noticed that each station's got a little different bandwidth, because usually the 4th one, if they've spread it out to the 4th, the audio is not as clean and crisp in the HD sound quality as, the primary channel.
Yeah, and Joe M mentioned that Open Sky has 4 talk paths, and they do that, and I know that they've had a lot of issues with it, but the way Open Sky works is a whole different animal over what P25 is. The way they modulate it and what they're modulating and how that works, it's a real interesting format.
Yeah, and the cellular channels, the cellular systems use some of the systems use a form of TDMA as well, or at least the older ones did, where they chopped it up into different time slots. Right. And that's all that is. And maybe we should expand a bit about how they split those. They're not actually splitting the frequency into 2 frequencies. They're taking little time slots.
Time slots in it.
Yeah, so they're chopping it up into, I don't know how many time slots. Well, there's two slots, but how many times per second are they?
Right. TDMA stands for time division multiple access, is what TDMA stands for. So, and FDMA is frequency. I can't remember, frequency division multiple access.
Yeah, something like
FDMA,
that. Yeah. Right, but it's basically you're setting up 2 time slots, and one's assigned to 0, one's assigned to 1, and that's how they separate. So you'll have a fraction of a second for the 0 and a fraction of a second for the 1, then another fraction for the 0. So you can split it up and basically have 2 talk paths on the same frequency.
Right, and like Chris said, their DMR is almost the same way. 2 DMRs are basically done the same way.
Yeah.
So where you can split into 2 voice paths.
I mean, it's pretty interesting that all this is running, and this is all happening in the background. We don't notice this as a scanner listener. Typically we'll program in the radio, and being able to
broken
being
sky.
being
Yeah.
able to listen.
Yeah. And if
Um,
you've got a phase two capable scanner, if you have it programmed in there, it really doesn't matter if it's phase one or phase two. The
No,
scanner is going to decode it either
right,
way. You don't
right.
have to make a programming change. That's a question we get scanner minister all the time: is do I have to program my scanner differently for a phase two? As
Right.
long as the scanner is capable of it, no, there's no difference in the
It's going to
program.
do it. Yeah. And most systems are designed or supposed to be designed so that if you're running a phase two system and a phase one radio migrates into it, it'll switch a voice channel into back to phase one.
Right. Yeah.
And
Unless they
that's,
lock that out, if they,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. Yeah, that's the system. The Starcom system in Chicago area is a phase two system, but there are still a lot of phase one
Phase
radios.
one
So when those
radios.
radios affiliate, that conversation stays phase one.
Right. And that isn't in most radios, that's an option. You don't, that's not, doesn't come with the radio. You have to buy that option.
Yeah,
So
everything's an option.
everything's an option.
yeah, I mean it's crazy. Just looking at this here, with Mayberry and Mount Airy, they got two sites, a site A and a site B, and you can see there that certain talk groups are actually, across the board, the ones that are that yellow gold color are, on both sites A and B. And then, of course, the communities, Mount Airy and Mayberry, are basically stay on their own territory pretty much. And the thing is that we get asked a lot. I know you can't give details about the system you're working on, that you work for, but the numbering scheme has, for the most part, that's decided upon the person that maintains the system when they initially plan it out. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah. The talk groups, the um, uh, number of talk groups, the from A to Z talk groups that you're going to get is usually done ahead of time. And then the numbering scheme for the units is done ahead of time.
Yeah,
So there
Um,
and
is.
there's sometimes there's a rhyme and reason to it, and sometimes there's not.
and we tried to do that. We tried to do that. We did that here. So there is a numbering scheme here. I know WyoLink. I have some of the WyoLink information for Wyoming is done the same way. If you look at the federal side, there is some thought given to it.
Mm-hmm.
Same with that nasty word that everybody hates. Was some thought given to that too, as to assignment of encryption stuff to various agencies around the state.
Yeah, but with the actual talk group numbers, a lot of times they have this great plan when they start out the system, and then they don't realize how big the system's going to get down the
Right.
road, and then that numbering system just goes to pot.
And here it was done by how big the county was. So some counties are way bigger than others population
Mm-hmm.
wise and are going to need more talk groups. So there was more numbers given to those counties versus a small county. I mean, we have one county in the state that has about 900 people living in it. But the county physically is bigger than Rhode Island and Maine and Vermont
Yeah.
altogether, I think. Yeah. So they only got a range of 100 talk groups where others got a range of 200 to 300 talk groups.
Right. There was a question from Joe. Does phase two get a higher priority than phase one?
No, as far as and because I've never played with either, or the priority still comes to what the priority is set for that talk group, is where the or that user. I'm sorry, the user gets one. You set that up at the beginning in the master site, and then when you design or not design, when you put all the parameters in for a radio, you tell it, here's the number the radio is going to be, the ID of it, the alias of it, what particular security group it's going to be in, what parameters it's going to get for its priority, so that it's by radio.
Yeah. Cool.
So everybody's heard Rich and I talking about simulcast. What is your best way to explain to somebody about simulcast? Like if somebody was, came up to you, they got a brand new scanner, they programmed it in, and they were saying, I'm having issues, and they say it's simulcast. What is it in your terms? Do you try to describe it?
You're getting the zeros and ones from the various sites at a little bit different timing, and your radio just doesn't have the brains to figure it out on the older radios. Where the newer radios, have the ability to do that too. And it's not off very far, but depending on, there's a lot of moving parts there with it. Bouncing off the building next to you, bouncing off a metal roof, whatever, or just, if a simulcast system is built right, it's going to have GPS timing. It's going to be timed very well, but yet it's still not going to be 100% perfect. And the radios just don't have the ability to pull those zeros and ones out, because they're getting them off just a little bit on the timing. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I've got a 796D sitting over here that will pick up the simulcast system here if I put just a regular pull-up antenna on it. But if I put it on my outside antenna on the roof, it doesn't like it.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we get a lot is we tell people that sometimes a better antenna is too good, and that causes you to pick up other sites. And the best way to pick up a simulcast system with a normal scanner, like a non-SDS type scanner, normally is to try to force it to pick up one radio tower versus 2 or 3 or 4.
Right. So
this kind of,
and I've seen a lot of questions too. Everybody's asking about putting all the channels, all the frequencies from all the sites. They're all the same frequency, so in the system, it sees it as a single site. It's not, you've got a picture there with 5 towers on it. That's one site in the system. It's not 5 sites, although it's made up of 5 towers. That simulcast system is one site.
So of course you have Motorola radios there. When you got the
I have a Kenwood somewhere.
the SDS 100, and I know that you have the SDS 100, so you've been able to kind of run the Motorola radio head to head with an SDS. What is what's your feelings? Is it worth the nearly $700 that to address the simulcast issue?
For where I've run it, it's worked very well. I think that, if you want to have a radio that's going to listen and it's not going to have any issues with it all the time, that the SDS is the way to go if you've got a simulcast system.
Yeah,
I've run it
here.
I've run it here. I've run it in Phoenix. I've run it in Surprise when we were down there in November. I've run it in Mississippi. I've run it in Vegas, although Las Vegas is encrypted pretty much 100%, if not 100%. And yes, I have tried the paperclip antenna on the 796, and it works just fine. Upstairs, not down here in the subterranean command post.
Yeah.
But anywhere I've taken it where there's been that I've been aware of a simulcast system, it's worked.
Yeah.
And my 325 kind of is hit and miss, because I can program them both up to do the same thing.
Yeah, I've noticed the same thing out here. I'm pretty far out, so any scanner works fine here because I'm so far away. But when I go into town, the only one that works reliably is the SDS.
Right. And the other thing I did add to my SDS, my 100, was I bought the Pro Voice option for it for Biloxi, Mississippi, Gulfport, Biloxi, and it worked very well down there. I didn't do anything other than to pull the information off radio reference and dump into it, and it worked really well. I did go in and modify it, and I just didn't pull it out of the database with the zip code. I went in and created a favorites list. Yeah.
So what would be your recommendation for somebody that's getting into the hobby and they're having to deal with a trunk system? What would you say, to your advice?
If you have a trunk system somewhere, if you're conventional now and they're going to a trunk system, or you're on a P25 trunk system and you want to buy a new radio, I would go with, there's the couple that Whistler has that are okay, but they have some issues with them. But the 996, 325 or the SDS series would be where I would go, just depending on what your budget, how many fun coupons you have.
Yeah, that's a key thing. The 996, Rich and I have talked about this. The 996 and the 325 and the 436 and 536. If you're not dealing with simulcast, they're phenomenal.
Yeah, and that one too. I forgot about those. I actually have the 536 here. So,
they're just phenomenal radios to distill without those simulcast issues. So Scott asked a question. What is the overall benefit? What are the advantages for simulcasts? On a trunk system.
So when they went simulcast here, what they wanted to do was have penetration. They didn't want to have any dead spots from site A to site B, and that's what simulcast does for you. Is it gives you you've got multiple sites around, and all the sites are supposed to fill in, and if it's done right, they're supposed to fill in equally. You never get 100%. There's no such thing as a 100% radio, but it helps fill in the dead spots and in the areas where you have issues shading from other sites or whatever, and that's what the simulcast does.
So essentially, it's just a whole bunch of signals hitting one area at the same time.
Yeah,
and instead of having just one big tower in the middle, you put a bunch of smaller towers around the area.
So there's three sites here in the greater Billings area. One is on the rims above town. If anybody's familiar with Billings, it's up where the airport is on the rims. One is at the dump. They actually call it the dump. It's above the landfill. And then the other site's out in what they call the Heights, out by a school out there called Skyview High. So those are the three sites. One kind of covers the Heights area. One looks at the downtown area, and then the other one looks at the west end of Billings. I think eventually they'll add another site because Billings is growing between here and Laurel. It's growing in, and they'll probably add another site eventually somewhere between Billings and Laurel.
Wow. But yeah, I mean, it's just phenomenal how the hobby has taken on so many things over my lifetime. I mean, you're looking at everything when I started on this hobby was analog, and then it switched to trunking. And then we had digital introduced, and then there's a whole slew of radios that have came into the fold. What is your, like if you didn't have any of the two-way radios, which radio would you bring with you?
If I went on the road?
Yeah, you could only bring one scanner, and you couldn't, bring any of the two-way radios with you.
I would bring my 100.
Because
number one, because I have it. If I didn't have my 100, I'd bring my 325.
Yeah.
I would bring one of those two, and they usually go with me. I'm going to Helena tomorrow, and I have my backpack, my on the road backpack that I take, and this has my little laptop in it. My little iPad is in here. There's a DMR radio in here. There's a little dual band Chinese ham radio in here. My 325 is in here. My 100's upstairs on the nightstand because we've been having weather issues. So I took it upstairs. But otherwise, those four radios go with me. But if I had to take one, I would take the 100 or the 325.
Now, do you ever...
I wish the 100 came in a case the size of a 325.
Of a 325. So it lives in here. Yeah. So I've got some other antennas for the scanner or my ham radio band stuff, and this is my little pack that goes with me. It went to Phoenix when I was in Phoenix in November. If I'm on the road for company business, I don't take this. I stick it in my other case, but this is my personal one.
No,
it has one of these. What I do with it? It's back over here. It's got one of these little antenna kits in it, the little suction cup antenna kit in it.
So those are great for hotels.
Oh yeah. It's been stuck to many hotel windows.
I left one in a hotel in St. Louis once. It's probably still there.
My other little mag mount antenna that I take is upstairs in my suitcase. It's too big to fit in that backpack, so I throw it in my suitcase.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just amazed by, I mean, do you like for your job, do you ever like, does the scanners ever come in handy, as a tool for your job?
When I first started doing what I do, the scanners were very handy because at the time we before the statewide microwave was built out, we used UHF linking for all of our VHF base stations, and we didn't have UHF radios in our cars or in our pickups at the time. We only had VHF radios, and if you lost a link, you'd lose a radio or you'd lose part of the state. And I had a scanner before then, and I stuck it in my truck and could stick those frequencies in there and monitor them, and it kept me from going to point C when I needed to go to point B. So yeah, and I use them all the time for picking up like PL tones. If you don't have a service monitor available or something to do it quick. If you know what the frequency is, you can key the radio up and watch your scanner, and it'll tell you especially the newer ones.
Yeah,
the older ones.
I love the PL search on my scanners. All the channels on my radio are always set to PL search.
Yeah,
so
I mean,
it's been a real handy thing, even on the trunking side. If we've been looking at stuff, we made it work. So
cool.
So it looks like Steve was asking about. So that's just the antenna that you have there is just the suction cups.
Yeah, right? It's just a suction cup one with the BNC connector on it.
I see. Yeah, so it's perfect to be able to.
And there's two little suction cups in there, and it's not super long. I wish it was a little bit longer, because if you're in a hotel, you stick it to the window and run it down to your radio on the nightstand or on the table by there. And you got to be real careful so your radio doesn't topple off and break something.
So we've been told by a lot of people that maintain the other side of the radio that there's a lot to be able to find on Radio Reference. A lot of things are not listed on Radio Reference. So it's definitely key, if you're bored, to definitely try doing ID
Rich
search.
Started it.
So you would definitely say, as being one of those people that maintain a system, it would be kind of handy to do an ID search.
ID search, yeah. Right. You're going to find stuff that isn't listed in Radio Reference. Doesn't matter where you are, you find other things that aren't in there. And some places, if you look at Radio Reference, some places, depending on who is doing that in that area, there's a lot of areas that there's really detailed stuff, but other areas of the country there's not. Here in Montana, there's some, and there's a lot of areas that aren't. I know with Todd in the Dakotas, there's not a lot in the Dakotas. I know North Dakota's in the process of going to a new 800 meg statewide trunk system slowly. So, the information is slowly trickling out, but not real fast. So the other thing too would be, if you don't see it in Radio Reference, the FCC's database is a good place to go search too, because that gives you some parameters to start with for your area.
Well, what I always suggest to people to do is at least in their home area, is to set up the trunking system with all the known talk groups named in the system, and then set it to ID search.
ID search.
And then lock out all the ones that you hear as you hear them. So eventually the only ones you're going to hear is stuff that's new to you.
Right.
And then that way you can find the new stuff. And if you are one of the people who can do that, obviously if you're in the business, you can't do it yourself. But if you're somebody like me who's not a part of an agency these days, I could submit that to Radio Reference once I figure out who they are.
And then you end up with little notepads with talk group numbers on them, and then you go in and submit them.
Yeah.
This is really old.
Yeah, I mean, that's it's the nature of the hunt. It used to be, you would put in from frequency, a low frequency and a high frequency, and then keep scanning up and down that, that search. But now, I mean, the new hunting is basically looking for talk groups for a lot of people, because that's all it's, basically a lot of agencies have moved to trunking systems.
Right.
And the neat thing about programming a trunking system, especially the P25 systems, is that on a P25 system, the only frequency you need in your radio is the currently active control channel for that particular site. The radio will automatically go to the right frequency.
Right. And most sites have two. They have a primary. Some will have three, but they'll have a main control channel and a secondary control channel that acts as a voice channel until it's turned into a control channel. So usually when it's assigning channels to talk groups, usually that one's assigned last. And then you could do what's called protection on others. If you have an issue with the channel, you can tell it that it's protected, so it'll always be used last as a voice channel. But with those two voice channels in there, if the first voice channel or the control channel goes down, it'll switch to the other one. Now, other systems rotate the control channel around. If it's like an LTR, there's no control channel. They're all control channels for the most part. EDAX will move it around too a little bit, but and then the big the big utility here, Northwest Energy, has a UHF trunk system. That's the MPT system, and it's on UHF, and that control channel moves almost every conversation. It'll move, but in a P25 system, it stays put. I know in some of the older Type 1 and Type 2 systems, they would rotate it. You could rotate them like at midnight, and they would rotate around.
Oops. I'm going to show this one. Scott had a great suggestion here. There's software packages that allow you to basically snoop out on these trunking systems. It decodes the data channels and find new talk groups. There's also one called Pro 96Com, and I'm sure there's a couple others. And some of the virtual control software also will help you log stuff. So even if you're not home, you can see new talk group activations.
Yeah, I did notice that on Radio Reference on the Montana forum. There, somebody had been using either Unitrunk or one of the others on one of the sites, and was decoding the control channel information.
Cool.
Yeah. So a question I have for, not so much in your state, but like in New England, for example, all the states are fairly close together. They're all basically moving to a trunk system. Now, is it hard to be able to patch those systems together that are neighboring from other states?
So if there's separate systems down where in Phoenix where Rich is at, there's several systems down there, and they played with what's called ISSI, inter subsystem interface, where you can have the systems talk to each other. It's another server that makes the two systems talk. And if it's all Mother M stuff there, I used the favorite word.
Yeah.
You get a lot of the stuff like emergencies and talk groups and IDs and things like that that'll move across the systems. But if you're talking a Motorola system to a Harris system to a EF Johnson Kenwood system, some of that stuff won't pass through. They've had issues with it. And I know that ISSI has grown in the P25 standards as we've been going along. So it's getting better, but that's how you connect the systems together. Or if you do like Montana is connected to Alberta, it's actually two radios connected back to back at the Sweetgrass the Sweetgrass border crossing. Thank you very much. That's considered Canadian soil and U.S. soil. So those two radios talk to each other. That's how those two systems are tied together. And you could do that with another system too. Just you have one that's on one system, one's on the other, and you could tie them up that way. But the most common way, like in the greater Phoenix area with Phoenix and Mesa and Scottsdale and all of those that were all tied together, when they started those up down there, it was all ISSI, because they were one of the very first forerunners in testing some of that stuff when it came out.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that they've got 3, or actually now 4, independent trunking systems in Maricopa County that, when they really could just be one system. But I guess that's the next best thing, is to have them be able to talk to each other.
Right.
The other thing that I've noticed, when I was, and I heard this a lot in Massachusetts State Police with their analog trunk system, and what they would end up doing is patching two talk groups together, and then it would generate its own talk group ID. I mean, is that still how it's done on P25, or is it slightly different?
It's just basically the same way. There's a way to do it, and I can't think what they call it. And I just tried to do it too here not too long ago. You take multiple talk groups and turn them into one talk group. So if any one of those talk groups, it's kind of a patch. It's done in the core. If any one of those talk groups goes active, it creates another talk group with another ID that traffic goes through. Some people call it a poor man's scanner in a trunking system. And that's another thing, that when you talk about a P25 trunk system, if you've got a system that's got 7 sites around a county, a city, whatever, and you got your scanner sitting on by 2 of the sites or 3 of the sites where it can hear those, and you could listen to either one of them. If a radio is not affiliated to the site you're locked on your scanner, if there's not a radio affiliated to that site on that talk group, you're not going to hear nothing, because that's part of a trunk system. If there's nobody affiliated to a site on that particular talk group, it's not going to waste a resource and going into transmit. So that's another thing that we run into, like here at my house, the three trunk sites down here, there's 1-800 meg site and 2 VHF. If I jump on the VHF site, which is to the west of me, I don't hear traffic downtown. If I go to lock it out and listen to the 800 meg site that's downtown Billings, I hear a boatload more traffic. than I do on the other site. So that's another thing with the P25 system. And you're trying to monitor some talk group that your hope is a really fun talk group to listen to. If nobody's on that site you're on, you're not going to hear nothing.
Yeah, and a scanner will not affiliate, which is obvious there. But a lot of people don't understand that the scanner won't cause that, site to affiliate. So
in a simulcast system, you don't have that issue because everything's everything. So
right.
It'll bring up all the sites usually. There is a way for it to not bring up sites if there's no one on them, but usually it lights up the same channel on all the sites.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, it's so crazy to think of that. And some people are scratching their head wondering why they don't hear a certain talk group, because it's just not there's not a radio on there affiliating with that particular tower or site that they're trying to listen to.
Right. And it's not just a scanner that does it. I mean, this $7,000 radio does the same thing. Yeah. If I'm affiliated to a site with that radio and I'm scanning a certain talk group, if nobody else is affiliated to that site that's on that talk group, I'm not going to hear that traffic.
We've talked about the DMR, LTR, EDAX, and P25, obviously, but question came up is how about NXDN trunking? How is that done, and how do you know how that's done differently than the other modes that we've talked about?
I don't know a whole lot about how NXDN trunking is done. The DMR stuff, that's all. DMR really is digital mobile radio. It was developed mostly by Motorola for businesses, and same with NXDN. But it's like Tetra too. I don't know a whole lot about Tetra, which was developed over in Europe. There's a couple of Tetra systems here, and I know there's just a handful of radios that will monitor a Tetra system. But I don't know how those are done. It's a lot of things. Like if you look at Codan Daniels, which is another manufacturer of radios out of Canada, their P25 system, once it goes into the radio receiver, how they handle that audio through their whole system is way different than the way Motorola does it, the way EDAX is done, the way OpenSky is done. They're all done differently. Once it comes out the other end of that radio on a RJ45 connector or a DB25 connector, that's all. There is some, unless you play with it, which I haven't played with any of them. The hocus pocus is different.
Yeah. So they all pretty much do the same thing. They just take different paths to get there.
Right. The way they do it. So, I'm just trying to read through the comments here real quick to see if anybody's asked anything interesting.
Well, a lot of people have, but some of it doesn't apply to what we're talking about now, which we'll get to those later. Let's see here.
So Scott is just asking a follow-up question. If your radio actually affiliates with the site, it doesn't drag that talk group to the site. So there has to be more than one radio affiliated in order for it to do it, or
no? What it does is if your radio affiliates to the site and the talk group that you're on, you will hear traffic on that talk group. Now, if someone else is affiliated to that site with another talk group, it will light that talk group up also. But if you've got a 5-channel site and you're the only one on that site because you're in rural America and you're the only one using it, the only traffic you're going to hear is what the talk group that your radios or that your channels turn to on your radio.
Oh, wow.
All right. Yeah, but when you have a system radio like your Motorola there, when you tune to a talk group that nobody else is affiliated, your radio will still affiliate with that radio, with that
site group, and then that talk
site.
Group,
right. But a scanner won't do that. The scanner will only hear traffic that there is at least one radio affiliated to.
Right.
So, let's see here. Well, we have a few questions that are not quite related to the trunking, but I don't see any more questions that we've dealt with that pertaining to trunking. Jonathan, do you see any?
Nah, I just a lot of comments, a lot of all over the place. But I think for the most part, in between Joe and Dan, they've been answering a lot of those questions that were off topic. Let me just
there's a question from let's see here. Can a TRX2 save a trunking radio system like the Save Wildcard? So I think what he's trying to ask is, can you set up a TRX2 for ID search like you can for a Uniden scanner? And basically, yeah, that's how a wild card works. So when you put a wild card in on a GRE, Whistler, Radio Shack type radio, it acts as a search device. So if you have a wild card set up as on a trunking system, and that wild card is turned on, it will open up on any traffic on that trunking system on the site that you or sites that you are capable of hearing. On a Uniden scanner, you can do the same thing by setting it to ID search versus ID scan. Again, two paths to the same endpoint.
And if you do it on ID search and you have some ID names in the system, when that talk group comes up, it's going to show you that name. It's not going to show you the number. It's going to
Right.
show you the alias. But then you'll see other talk groups that aren't in there. You'll see the number come up. So you'll have to do something to keep track of them, write them down, or do something, and then just try to listen to them and figure out who the heck it is talking on them.
Yeah, and if you're using virtual control software like ARC 536 or ARC XT, you can log all that activity and then go back in later and say, okay, I recognize all those talk group IDs, and hey, here's a bunch of their unknown talk group, and there's the numbers, and now I can start figuring out what those are.
And I see Joe M asked a question at 54 after there about if your subscriber radio's on talk group 1 and you are scanning 2, 3, and 4, will it drag? No, it won't. If you're on talk group 1 and nobody else is affiliated to those, if you're scanning, you're not going to hear talk group 2, 3, or 4. You're only going to hear talk group 1.
Yeah, because you won't subscribe on a channel you're scanning, only on the channel that's selected, right?
Yeah, I told this story before, I think, on the last show I was on, and this was a horror story that Motorola brought up about the Portland area. There was a lieutenant that lived outside of Portland at a site was a 5 or 6 channel site, and he took 5 or 6 portables home and put them on the various talk groups of the areas around Portland, and actually tied that site up because every one of those radios received those talk groups and busied the site out.
Yeah. Wow. There was a question earlier about running Pro 96Com on some of the newer Uniden scanners. Pro 96Com will work with the 996 XT, but I don't think it works on a 996 P2. I haven't tried it, but I don't think it works on a P2, but it will work on an XT.
And I don't know, there was a Motorola engineer that had I don't know if he had a 325 or its predecessor that he had either that on or the other Unitrunk or something on that he was using. And I know it worked on that radio, but I can't remember which version it was.
Yeah. And, there's other programs. And Pro 96Com is nice because it's actually very easy to set up and operate. Unitrunker is a little bit more complicated, but, it's a lot more powerful. It does a lot more stuff. And it does a lot more formats, too.
Right. The NASCAR question, since everybody knows I'm a huge NASCAR fan, for scanning NASCAR other than the teams, I bought a radio, a Racing Electronics 3000 that I use. Rich actually saw it when I was in Phoenix. Mm-hmm. I like that radio because you go to the track and it downloads that stuff. Otherwise, you got to go buy the frequency list to put it in your radio. And you can pull the stuff off Radio Reference. Sometimes it's accurate, sometimes it's not, but that stuff can change from track to track. So that was the reason I invested in the RE3000. But you could use a 125. There it is. I said it. And program all the frequencies in the PL tones, but it just because of everything that's going on, to me the 3000 works the best, and I've used it multiple times, and it just fits the bill very well. But,
with the headset set up like that was pretty awesome. Let's see, is there any setup that will display the alias when a talk group is received? So the alias is like the talk group name. Instead of saying talk group 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it'll show Mayberry Police. On an NXDN system, you can actually see the alias name as transmitted by the system on a Uniden scanner. Motorola and the P25 systems don't do that. That would have to be programmed in the radio. So you'd have to program your radio so that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 shows Mayberry Police. But you can have and if you're talking about the radio ID itself, you can program in the radio ID and have that show up with a name. But on an XDN system, you can actually see that. So.
Yeah, I mean that's very interesting. Going back to the NASCAR thing, I mean, if you don't have the racing electronics, yeah, you definitely need something with PL tone. We've talked about this
Mhm.
before. I mean,
Yeah.
you know it, Dale. It's an RF mess that's there with everybody on
I
UHF.
I think I'd posted on the Scanner Guys Facebook page a while back a picture of one of the gals from Fox Racing with a unit in racing scanner. And I noticed this weekend at the Daytona 500, she had a newer scanner. I couldn't tell if it was a 125 or a 325. I'm assuming it's a 125. But she had the little stubby antenna on it. Didn't have a long antenna on it. Had the little stubby antenna on it, and she had it on her little belt with all her other radio stuff for the broadcast. But I did notice that this year. I didn't get if I had gotten a picture of it, I'd have put it on there, but I didn't get one.
Yeah, I mean that's I mean you look at just even the broadcast stuff is, is creating some interference there.
Yeah,
You have, the radio partner, you have at the tracks now because it's only two networks that cover it, basically NBC for the latter half and then Fox, and sometimes both Fox and NBC are at a track, reporting whether it's
right.
doing the live broadcast or shooting stuff to be to be used on their. I know each network has got their own NASCAR show. I know Fox has got, what is it, the Race Hub?
Race Hub,
Yeah. What is, since we're on the,
and you got MRN too. MRN is there too, doing the radio stuff. So for the radio broadcast.
with all the changes with NASCAR, what's your thoughts? I mean, you've been a NASCAR fan for years. I mean, you went from, the cars are constantly changing. The other thing too, it's the stage racing. What do you
Right.
think of all this?
Well, the stage racing was done just to make it more exciting because you had you went from a race of a 500-mile race, you went 500 miles, and it was basically a start to the end. And then the only thing that you were either doing pit stops to get fuel or pit stops when there was a crash, when there was a caution. And it got kind of boring in the middle because everything would get strung out. And unless there was a caution, it really wasn't. People were feeling, some folks, mostly NASCAR, was feeling it was getting real boring. So they started the stage racing to make it a little bit more exciting, and then put some points in with it. And if you watch a race like the one last weekend, you'll notice as you get to the end of that stage, things get a little bit more exciting, and then there may be some bumper cars going on, and you win points at the end of the year, could maybe help you become a champion. So the other part of it is the way the cars have morphed from, you look at the early days of NASCAR, it was a car you could go down to the car dealer and buy it and turn it into a race car. You stripped everything out of it, stuck a roll bar in it, and put sheet metal on all the edges so that air flowed around it. If you look at some of those cars close up, to now, the only thing that's factory on it is the hood, the roof, and the trunk deck. Everything else
Yeah, I
is
mean
everything
everything
else
else.
is,
Yeah.
is yeah. You
What do you
know,
think of the one lug nut now?
I haven't made up my mind on that yet. I know there were some issues with it this weekend. It's a new thing, so I'm sure there'll be some issues with it until they figure it out how to do
I
it.
I mean, a lot of the teams, before were getting, four of the five lug nuts on there tight. I
Mhm.
mean, it was all types of things, so they're getting penalized. I remember it was a few years back they were checking lug nuts to make sure that
Yeah,
at
they
the
did
end of
that
the race
last year at the end of the race. They checked lug
they
nuts,
check
yeah,
about the lug nuts. I
to
mean,
make sure
this.
you had all five, and hopefully they could see if they were actually cranked down all the way.
I mean, the thing is if you don't do a good job with this one lug nut, that's going to make very interesting for what will happen on the track.
Yeah. Well, they had one tire come off, and they figured that when they stuck the wheel on the hub, there's little pimples on there. I don't know what else you call them, little pins that the wheel would you turn and lock it on so that when that nut goes on, it tightens down tight. And they didn't do that, and
Mhm.
that's why that one wheel came off. They say so. It'll be interesting to see, in a bad crash, what happens if they come off or what they do. So well, you'll have to see.
I mean, the other
Um,
thing too, a lot of people don't realize it, and when I was watching NASCAR all the time, I actually paid for the subscription through NASCAR.com to be able to listen to the scanner audio. I
Right.
mean, I think that's one of the best things is being able to hear the scanner audio because you're hearing the behind the scenes action that's going on with your
Yeah.
driver. I mean, I can't imagine going to the racetrack and not listening to your driver. I mean, you're just watching them go around and around. I mean, being able to hear your drivers or a few drivers, you're able to hear what their plan is, what's going on
Mhm.
behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And the
Well, when we
feedback
were at
and
that race back in Phoenix, where we were sitting, we could see this side of the track, but not the other side. So if there was a crash going on the other side of the track, we heard it on the scanner long before we ever realized it was happening. Well, long
and and we were using two
relative.
radios. Rich had his radio there, and I had mine. Rich had his on
Mm-hmm.
certain channels, and I had mine on others. But unless you're doing multiple scanners, some of you're going to miss some stuff no matter what you're doing. If you stick it into scan, you can put it into scan, and you're going to hear little snippets of everybody. But
Yeah.
if like my grandson likes the 11 car and the 18 car, we listened to that in the 22 car a little bit, and then the 5 car because he was the one leading for the most of it. But you don't hear all the traffic. If you look at what's on that NASCAR app, is you've got all those radios there. So somewhere at the track, whether Racing Electronics is doing it or NASCAR's doing it, there's somebody doing it that's got that many radios that's listening to the track officials. The guy that says put it out when they do the flag, and he's got a distinctive voice. And then all the different teams, and then MRN is on there too. That one you don't have to pay for, but there's 40 some radios that are out there listening to all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so interesting to be able to. I know that they've, way back when they were looking, some of the race teams were looking at some of the technology that we have for Scanner Master's sister company. They were actually looking at trying to be able to monitor the competition. I'm not too sure where that went, but I remember, possibly looking at that. I mean, it's so interesting. I mean, you also have monitoring the other teams too. You have, I remember back when I was, when they allowed the drivers to be able to communicate with their other teammates when they were at a track where they could
Right.
actually draft with each other. And that was quite interesting. They had a little dial thing on the
They're portable. They're portable radios right next to them, and they could change the channel, or they put a knob on the dash. There was some, that they could change it.
Yeah, I mean, it was just the coolest thing to be able to hear them, because I remember listening to my driver. Usually listen to just his primary and secondary channel, and then when they were doing that, you had the one spotter basically spotting for the two cars because they were right up against each other, which was really neat.
Right.
But I just can't imagine going to the racetrack without listening to your driver. You're right there.
A lot of people do it there. I mean, most of the people have headphones on because it's so noisy, but a lot of people rent them. A lot of people own their own. And it's gotten to the point, NASCAR, they started to do digital stuff. They still do. Most teams have multiple radios that they're wearing. The crew chief's could have 3 radios that he's got on him. Some are only scanners, but he's got 2 different radios that he can talk on. One's an internal communication that's usually digital. It's either DMR or an XDN or something like that. And then they have their analog one. They talked about going 100% digital, and there was a bunch of pushback on it from the fans going, no, we want to hear this stuff.
Yeah.
I noticed with certain teams, I remember, when I was listening to Carl Edwards back when he was racing. So, the crew chief, and everybody was on the primary channel, so, and then the crew chief had a secondary radio. He would communicate to his spotter, Jason. So let's say they were at a track where Jason was constantly giving him plenty of information. Sometimes, the crew chief would go over the other channel and say, hey, tell him that we're going to pit, 2 laps from now. So, rather than just being on the primary channel, distracting the driver, they could feed. And then as soon as Jason could tell him, hey, we're going to pit, and, he's basically, you're clear, and then so on. And he could tell him when he gets a breath, tell him that that we're going to be pitting soon.
There's channels that everybody knows about, but I still think there's team channels too that they can all talk to each other as a team that we don't know about, that they all do, So, and it's kind of comes down to the team orders at certain times of the year that, we know that car number 1 is in for a championship, car number 3 is not, but car number 3 can make it harder for everybody else to get close to car number 1. So I think there's some of that going on, even though they say no, we don't do that, but I think there are team orders. We've seen it in
Until
the
they get
past.
caught. Yeah,
We've seen it
until
in
they
the
get
past
caught.
when we've seen it in the past when Clint Boyer had the itchy arm when he had the cast on his arm. That kind of ended the Michael Waltrip, or not Waltrip, the Michael Waltrip racing team. So,
Wow.
We got a couple other questions, so we'll get through those real quick before we go. We were talking earlier about the trunking systems. Is there a difference? What's the difference between the system ID and the NAC?
So each system has its own ID. That IDs the system, and a NAC code is just a digital version of a PL code. It's a network access code is what they call it. Some call it something different depending what radio manufacturer, but a NAC is basically a P25 digital PL tone or DPL tone. And a system ID is used for the whole system. Everything has to have a system ID on it. When you program this with the software, you have to have either what's called an ASK, an advanced system key, or a software system key that has all that system ID information in it. And there's some background information that it's sort of proprietary to the system. If you look at the systems, each one has a different ID.
Okay. And do either of you have any experience with the P25 RX2? I have not played with one. I've heard about it, but I don't know much more about it than.
Yeah, I don't have any information for it at all.
Yeah, from what I understand, it's kind of a SDR type radio. And then one other one, Pro 96Com apparently does work on a 325 and a 996P2. So I will have to try that. I do have a 996P2, so I'll have to try that. It won't work on a 536, unfortunately, but there's time between there's time for some of the older radios.
Right. And the WAC and the system ID are tied together when they're created. They're two different numbers that come up. I've noticed that some systems have with the WAC and ID is the same, but usually all of that's created when the system is designed. Usually the system engineers that design it come up with those numbers.
And you can have more than one NAC, network access code per system and site. I wasn't aware of that, but
there's a way to do it. One of the things we run into here, because we're mostly VHF, is there is some NAC codes at some of the sites to help them keep from talking together, and they can do some NAC codes in there to help interference between sites.
Would you have if you had multiple NAC codes at a site, would they be on different frequencies?
Yeah. Or the same frequency pair at different sites.
Right.
Where you would put the NAC code in there, and it's not used a whole lot. It's used a little bit, and it's done at the system level.
Cool. Let's see here. Do we have anything else, Jonathan?
I'm just looking through right now just to see if there's anything else.
Let's see here. Question about doing favorites lists on an SDS 100. Basically, the best thing to do is use either Sentinel or ARC 536, and you can import a lot of that information from Radio Reference to get you started. And then as you learn more about the system, you can go about it and edit your favorites list with your specific information, either by deleting stuff you're not interested in or adding stuff that may not be in the database. And let's see here. Yes, retirement life is going great for those that asked. Dale?
What's that?
Do you use APX Next yet in your area?
We don't have any APX Next. I'm reading stuff over here. Just scroll over here. I do have my company phone. I do have Motorola's Waves app on my phone that we're using the Motorola Wave thing, that we're playing with it a little bit. And my phone occasionally talks, which scares the bejesus out of my wife, because all of a sudden voices will come out of my phone, and that she hasn't got used to that yet.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I don't have that problem with my wife, so
Yeah.
I can listen. I can listen all I want, and she. Yeah, I'm not a huge NASCAR fan. I did have a lot of fun at the NASCAR race this fall that I went to, but I don't know a whole lot about NASCAR other than what I've learned talking to Dale and Jonathan, who know a lot more about that than I do. Yeah, let's see here.
So he's asking more about the NAT code. Will it blink the correct NAT code or NOR set on the 100 or 200 with the corresponding programming one?
Yeah, that's kind of a neat feature.
I've never tried it. I'll have to try that and see if I can make it do that. NAC will blink the correct NAC code if not is set.
So here's
oops, sorry.
here's
a little bit into trains. Yeah, matter of fact, there was some text going back and forth between the three of us today on trains. For those of you that don't know in the group, I live in Montana Rail Link country, and Montana Rail Link's about to turn back into BNSF. They've given up their lease with the line up here, so I'm real curious as to what's going to happen with all the Montana Rail Link equipment, buildings, engine, power, cars, whatever. Is it going to morph into BNSF stuff, or are they going to sell it off? Because it's not currently owned by BNSF. The main line that runs across southern Montana is BNF track that was leased by MRL. But then, the question is what is BNSF going to take all the little spurs up? Are they going to run BNSF power down all these little spurs to pick up lumber company stuff? And there's 3 oil refineries here that they run cars in and out of. We have a sugar beet factory that uses coal, and then they dump sugar into rail cars. Is all that going to turn into BNSF, or how are they going to deal with that?
Well, I know out here in the Phoenix area, they are very big into BNSF contracting out local switching to a small company. There's 2 of them within 30 miles here. There's a auto, not an auto plant, but a distribution yard where the trains come in with the cars on the tri-levels, and they have a contract switcher for that. And there's a new industrial park over near the Air Force Base, which again, they have a contracted company to do all the switching, and they bring it out to the main line, and then BNSF just picks up the main line. So they may do something similar to that in some of those areas. Jonathan, you had a question up that we accidentally got.
Yeah. So I mean, Robert mentions that he's got the BC 125 AT, the RH 77 CA, which I don't have any experience with that antenna, but I've heard, I've seen that on forums and such as a recommended antenna. And then, those railroad timetables are certainly handy. Having them, if you have multiple railroads such as Norfolk Southern or CSX or any of the other big players, you can find some of those timetables online. And, the thing is that I would suggest is definitely if you're, on your smartphone, there's some tools out there as well that you can use, such as the Heritage Unit app, not only for tracking heritage units, but if you hear radio communications over the radio, you can actually look up the train symbols on the Heritage Unit app. So if you hear Z74, is one of the train symbols, you can actually look up that train symbol on the Heritage Unit app, and you can find out where it originates from and where it's going to end. And you can also, I would say that, and then there's a couple other apps that are on the smartphone, such as the one that I just downloaded was Rail Map, which shows you all the railroad lines across the country, even some of the abandoned ones. So you can definitely look at that as well. And then, of course, the Broadcastify app as well. So if you're If you're wanting to monitor, one of those scanner feeds that are away from you, so you can hear what's going on. Let's say you have, there's a scanner feed in downtown Cincinnati, and you're up a ways on the line. You can monitor some of the activity on your phone that's going on down there, and then run your scanner locally to be able to hear, activity there, so you can know if there's activity coming out of a major hub. You can then know that's going on.
These are both 77 CAs that look so familiar. One is they're both SMA type, and one is, I think, a male and one's a female. But they're both 77 CA antennas are made by Diamond.
Yeah, and I believe somebody mentioned in the comments that that's one of the antennas that Danny Harmon recommends.
Yeah, I saw that.
Which is a guest of ours on the Train Aficionado show. And then Carmen, also mentions the RH77 is a great antenna. It's just a large antenna. We talked about last week during the Train Aficionado live show about some of the Smiley antennas. So they work great as well.
I use it to replace that when I'm on the road. This is my little Chinese radio, my little Chinese ham radio, but this antenna doesn't have a whole lot of reach out, but I screwed that other one on there and it gets out pretty good.
Yeah.
I've never tried it on a scanner, although it has a different connector on it. I have to put an adapter on it.
Yeah, I think we've pretty much cleaned out the comment section, guys.
All right. Let me just wrap this up with a few closing slides here. We want to remind you that the Scanner Guys are brought to you by viewers like you. When you shop the Scanner Guys merch store at thescannerguyshow.com, you basically help to keep these shows going. Also, when you order all your scanner accessories and products through the affiliate link below in all of our videos, that helps us as well. And our special thanks this week to our sponsor, which is Scanner Master. You can give them a call at 1-800-722-6637 or shop them online at scannermaster.com. If you're going to shop them online, use the affiliate link down below. That helps us with each and every broadcast. Train Aficionado Live will be our next show next Wednesday. We'll be broadcasting live at the first Wednesday of the month, which is March the 2nd, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Pacific. You can follow them on social media, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram. Make sure you check out the Train Aficionado website. We've got some new blog entries coming up. I'm trying to post one each and every Monday. So definitely check it out. We've got a couple of new blog entries. One about the Cincinnati terminal, a beautiful station. And we also just posted one about a great rail fanning destination just a little bit north of Cincinnati, Hamilton, Ohio, which goes through some of the history and some of the lines. This city that's just north of Cincinnati certainly had a lot of activity in its heyday, still does. But yeah, I mean, get the lay of the land from that blog entry. And then we've got some other blog entries coming up soon in the next upcoming Mondays. I think that's when I'm going to start posting is each and every Monday, but that may change. So the Scanner Guys will be back Wednesday, March the 9th of 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Pacific. We haven't decided on a topic as of yet. And I just want to remind you, if you're a Roku, Apple TV user, download the YouTube app. You can watch the broadcast right on your big screen TV, and definitely do that. And don't forget to follow, like, and subscribe to our social media, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram at The Scanner Guys. And make sure you check out the website, thescannerguyshow.com. And then definitely subscribe to the channel. We can't stress that enough. Subscribe to the channel. If you haven't already, definitely subscribe to the Train Aficionado channel. We're trying to get that up to 1,000 subscribers. So definitely do that, and that'll be great. So Dale, I want to thank you so much for joining us. I mean, it kind of gave us a little bit of perspective of what it's like on the other end of the radio, and kind of get your perspective of how it all works. I mean, Rich and I kind of know it from the scanner point of view for the most part, but just having it from your perspective is really cool. Yeah, Carmen, you're right. Hamilton, Ohio is the home of R&L Electronics.
Yeah, they're a big fixture at all the ham fests, including Dayton.
The other, I was going to say the other trunk systems I have in my 200 here is I've got a Type 2 system for one of the refineries. One of the other
Mhm.
we have an Exxon refinery here, and we have a Conoco, whatever their parent company is these days, refinery. We also have a Cenex one. One of them has a P25 system, trunk system. The other two are Type 2 systems, and I have those in my 200. I don't listen to them a whole lot because you hear a lot of traffic, but it's just a lot of stuff that you don't understand. But occasionally, if something's going on, I'll turn it on or not. But there's other trunk P25 systems that are not public safety related, and one
Yeah.
of them is that refinery here.
Yeah. Our
Um,
local utilities are
yeah.
on a P25 system out here too. So it isn't just public safety, although the vast majority of it is. So
The DoD system here is a VHF trunk system in the state that has to do with the fact that if Montana succeeded from the United States, we'd be the third largest nuclear power in the world. But it's all encrypted because it's Department of Defense stuff that has to do with some
yeah.
pretty serious stuff. So it's one of the zones in a 7-zone system, and there's several other. I don't remember if anything in Arizona. I know the one in the Air Force Base down in Wyoming is part of it, and then there's one in California
Yeah.
and somewhere else. But it's part of a huge system.
So, alrighty.
Well, that's going to wrap it up for us this evening. I want to thank you so much for joining us again, Dale. We really appreciate you being on the show, talking about, of course, trunking and NASCAR during this broadcast, and some rail fanning as well. I just want to thank you so much.
I still want to put my word in there for a big roundtable. If we could get Danny in there, me in there, and maybe Lindsay back, and maybe Bearcat Joe in there, and just have a big roundtable.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully there'll be some new equipment coming out in the near future. I mean, it'd be great to get a roundtable discussion once it's released, and if everybody's got the radio, what their thoughts on it. I mean, even talking about a roundtable discussion about future accessories with some of these radios. I mean, I know Bluetooth has been talked about heavily. The thing is the hobby is going to change slightly with all the encryption going on. So.
I have that for my 100. I've actually used it. It works pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
That Habis or Haggis or whatever they call it, Bluetooth. So that would be a neat feature to have in the radio. I know that, in the expensive ones, you can get a Bluetooth option for them. So it's starting to make its get it dip its toe in the water.
Yep, absolutely.
All right. Well, I'm Jonathan Higgins.
I'm Rich Carlson.
And Dale Osborne.
Have a great night. Thank you so much for watching the Scanner, guys. We'll
see you all next time.
Good night.
Have a good night.